In the quiet village of Obu, where ancient traditions and deep spiritual beliefs shape every life, a sinister curse threatens to destroy one family's legacy. Obinna, a devout and beloved young man, suddenly finds himself consumed by a dark, insatiable desire no woman in the village can satisfy. What began as strange urges soon spirals into a nightmarish curse, turning him from a symbol of purity to an outcast whose very presence brings ruin. As the villagers' wrath grows, Obinna's once respected family faces ostracism, shame, and an impending doom. Desperate to break the curse before the blood moon seals his fate forever, Obinna embarks on a dangerous journey into the heart of the forbidden forest, where secrets from his family's past and dark betrayals come to light. With his father's life hanging by a thread and his family's honor in jeopardy, Obinna must confront not only the vengeful sorcerer Ikemba, but also his own buried demons. But in a world where love, revenge, and dark magic intertwine, sacrifices must be made. As the clock ticks down to the final eclipse, Obinna faces a harrowing choice: to save himself or protect those he loves, even if it means losing everything. The Cursed Desire, Obinna's Fall, is a gripping supernatural thriller filled with family tragedy, forbidden love, and unexpected twists that will keep you turning pages until the shocking climax. Will Obinna break free from the shadows of his past, or will the curse consume him and all he holds dear? Based on a true story. Before we dive into this powerful story, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you find it compelling, don't forget to hit subscribe. The air in the village of Obu was thick with excitement. The annual harvest festival was in full swing, with drums pounding rhythmically and children dancing around a large bonfire. The scent of roasted yams and peppered goat meat filled the air, drawing villagers from their homes to celebrate. It was a night of joy, where worries were forgotten and families came together to give thanks for the year's bounty. Obinna, known throughout Obu for his piety and devotion, stood at the edge of the square, watching the festivities with a smile. His father's health had been declining, and tonight's celebration was a rare reprieve from the worry that hung over their household. But even as he tried to relax, there was an unsettling feeling in the pit of his stomach, a darkness he couldn't quite place. Suddenly, the mood in the square shifted. Gasps echoed through the crowd, and the drumming faltered. Obinna's vision blurred as if a veil had been thrown over his eyes. A strange force seemed to pull him forward, beyond his control. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat louder than the last. The faces of his fellow villagers became hazy blurs as if they were mere shadows in the corner of his vision. Before he realized it, he was standing in the middle of the square, his hands gripping the arms of Obinna, the wife of one of the village elders. Her eyes were wide with shock, her headscarf askew. Obinna's grip was tight, too tight. It was as though his hands were no longer his own. A murmur spread through the crowd like wildfire. Accusations filled the air. Obinna has lost his mind. What kind of madness is this? Is this not Pastor Nduka's son? How could he disgrace himself like this? Obinna's mind screamed in confusion. He couldn't understand how he had ended up in this compromising position, touching a woman he barely knew. His body seemed possessed, driven by a force beyond his control. He fought to release his grip, but his muscles refused to obey. Stop it. Let go. Amina's husband, a towering man named Chidi, rushed forward, fury blazing in his eyes. He tore Obinna away from his wife with a powerful shove. Obinna stumbled, falling to the ground. The moment his hands released Obinna, his mind cleared, and he blinked in horror at the scene before him. "What have I done?" he muttered, trembling as the reality of the situation sank in. The villagers, once celebrating, now stood in shocked silence, their faces twisted with disgust and outrage. Obinna's mother pushed through the crowd, her face pale. "Obinna, what is this madness?" she cried, trying to pull him to his feet. Before he could respond, a loud, agonizing scream pierced the air. Obinna's father, who had been watching from a distance, clutched his chest and collapsed. Villagers rushed to his side, but the old man's breathing was shallow, his eyes rolling back. "He's having a heart attack," someone shouted. Obinna's mother wailed, her hands trembling as she cradled her husband's head. The village priest, a stern man named Okafor, stepped forward. His eyes bore into Obinna with a gaze that could cut through iron. "This is a sign," Priest Okafor declared. "The spirits are displeased. Obinna's disgrace has brought misfortune upon his family." Obinna's heart sank. He could barely process what had just happened. His father was dying, and somehow he was being blamed for it. The villagers began to mutter, and the whispers of curses and accusations grew louder. "Obinna has been bewitched. No, it's his own doing. He has sinned. Pastor Nduka's son has brought shame upon us all." The village elders gathered, their grim faces illuminated by the flickering flames of the bonfire. One of them, Elder Ease, stepped forward. His voice boomed over the crowd, silencing the murmurs. "Enough," he commanded. "Obinna, you will explain yourself before the council tomorrow. Until then, you are to remain in your home. If this behavior continues, we may have no choice but to banish you and your family." Obinna could barely stand as the reality of the threat sank in. Banishment. It was a fate worse than death in their close-knit village. His family, who had lived here for generations, would be cast out, forced to wander with nowhere to go. His mother's cries echoed in his ears as they lifted his father onto a makeshift stretcher. But even as the villagers dispersed, Obinna couldn't shake the feeling that something far darker was at play. As he tried to make sense of his actions, a sudden, sharp pain shot through his skull. He clutched his head, gritting his teeth as a voice, cold and mocking, whispered in his ear. "This is only the beginning, Obinna. You will destroy everything you love." Terrified, Obinna stumbled home, his mind spinning with fear and confusion. Whatever had taken control of him tonight was not finished with him yet. The darkness was just beginning to unfurl its tendrils into his life, threatening to pull him and his family into the depths of despair. Cliffhanger ending. As Obinna lay in bed that night, haunted by the events of the evening, the strange markings began to appear on his arms, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Obinna lay in bed, staring up at the thatched ceiling of his family's small hut. The events of the festival played over and over in his mind like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. His body still trembled with the remnants of the strange force that had seized him. The villagers' angry shouts and the disgust in their eyes were burned into his memory, but nothing haunted him more than the sight of his father collapsing in pain. His mother's sobs came in waves from the adjoining room where she tended to his father. Obinna could hear her praying desperately for a miracle, her voice raw with desperation. "Please, gods of our ancestors, spare my husband. Spare him and punish me instead." Obinna's heart clenched with guilt. His father had been healthy just days ago, and now he was fighting for his life. The thought that his actions he couldn't even remember, had brought such suffering to his family filled him with shame. Unable to bear the sound of his mother's cries any longer, Obinna rose from his bed. He wrapped a cloth around his shoulders and quietly slipped outside. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the village. Shadows stretched long and dark, making the familiar paths feel foreign and threatening. He needed answers. There had to be some explanation for what had happened to him. The voices, the uncontrollable urges, it all felt like a curse, something beyond the natural world. As the cold night air bit into his skin, the strange markings on his arms seemed to pulse faintly, a reminder of the darkness that had taken hold of him. Without thinking, his feet led him to the small hut of Amara, the village healer. She was known for her knowledge of herbs and potions, but whispers in the village claimed she dabbled in more than just traditional medicine. Obinna hesitated at her door, wondering if he was making a mistake. But with his father's life hanging in the balance, he couldn't afford to be cautious. Summoning his courage, he knocked on the door. After a moment, it creaked open, revealing Amara's piercing eyes in the dim light. She was a striking woman, with high cheekbones and dark, knowing eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Obinna," she said softly, her voice smooth as silk. "I was expecting you." Obinna blinked in surprise. "You were?" Amara nodded slowly and gestured for him to enter. The inside of her hut smelled of burning herbs and strange, pungent oils. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars of dried plants, animal bones, and other mysterious ingredients. In the center of the room was a small fire, its embers casting flickering shadows that danced like spirits on the walls. Amara motioned for Obinna to sit on a woven mat. He hesitated, but the urgency of his father's condition pushed him forward. As soon as he sat, Amara leaned close, her eyes narrowing as she inspected the glowing markings on his arms. "This is no ordinary affliction," she said, her voice low and grave. "The markings, the voices you hear. These are signs of a powerful curse." Obinna's heart sank. He had feared as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill down his spine. "Please, Amara," he begged. "I don't understand why this is happening. My father is dying because of me. Can you help?" Amara's eyes softened for a moment, but there was a glint of something else there, something Obinna couldn't quite place. "Curses of this kind are not easily undone," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "But there is a way to suppress its effects, at least for a time." She turned to one of her shelves and retrieved a small vial filled with a dark, viscous liquid. "This potion will calm the urges you feel and silence the voices in your head. But be warned, Obinna, it will only mask the symptoms, not cure the cause." Desperate, Obinna reached for the vial. "If it can help my father, I'll do anything," he said, his voice breaking. "But what about the source of the curse? How do I end it?" Amara's expression darkened. "That is a more dangerous path, one that requires confronting those who have wronged you, or perhaps those your family has wronged." She paused, her eyes boring into his. "Are you prepared to uncover the truths that may be buried in your family's past?" Obinna's mind whirled. Could it be true? Was there something his family had done to incur such wrath? His father had always been a man of virtue. How could he be responsible for this curse? Before he could ask more questions, Amara pressed the vial into his hands. "Go now, before the night ends. Give this to your father, and take some yourself. It will buy you time." Obinna nodded, clutching the vial like a lifeline. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Amara, why are you helping me?" he asked, unable to shake the feeling that there was more to her generosity. Amara's lips curled into a faint smile. "Let's just say that your suffering is interesting to me," she replied cryptically. "Now go." Obinna's unease grew, but he had no choice. He rushed back home, praying that the potion would at least stabilize his father. When he arrived, he found his mother kneeling beside his father, her eyes red and swollen. Without a word, Obinna uncorked the vial and administered a few drops to his father's lips. The old man's breathing steadied, and for the first time that night, he seemed to find some relief. Obinna's mother looked up at him, tears of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. But the weight in Obinna's heart only grew heavier. As he took a dose of the potion himself, the voices in his mind quieted, and the strange urges subsided. But the markings on his arms remained, glowing faintly in the dim light. He knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The true source of the curse was still out there, lurking in the shadows. Cliffhanger ending. As Obinna tried to rest, he was jolted awake by a new vision, a glimpse of a dark figure standing at the edge of the forest, whispering his name. Obinna knew that whoever, or whatever, this was, it held the key to breaking the curse. But facing it could mean uncovering secrets that might destroy him and his family forever. Dawn broke slowly over Obu, casting long shadows across the village as it stirred to life. The events of the previous night still weighed heavily on Obinna's mind as he watched his father sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. The potion Amara had given him seemed to have worked, at least for now. His father's breathing was steady, and the pallor that had marked his face had faded slightly. But Obinna knew the reprieve was temporary. He could still feel the faint pulse of the curse in his veins, a dark force lurking beneath the surface. The markings on his arms were barely visible in the morning light, but they were a constant reminder that time was running out. The village square, where Obinna had disgraced himself the night before, was now bustling with activity. Vendors set up their stalls, children chased each other, and women gossiped as they fetched water from the well. Yet, as soon as Obinna stepped outside his hut, a hush fell over the crowd. Conversations died, and accusing eyes followed him wherever he went. "He's the one who brought the spirit's wrath upon us," whispered one villager to another. "Keep your daughters away from him," warned another. Obinna's heart tightened, but he kept his head down. He was determined to prove his innocence, even if he didn't fully understand what was happening to him. But the villager's scorn was the least of his worries. Today, he would have to face the elders and explain himself. The summons came shortly after sunrise. Two stern-faced elders arrived at Obinna's home, their expressions grim. "The council awaits you," Obinna said, Elder Ease, his voice heavy with judgment. "You must answer for your actions." Obinna's mother watched with tear-filled eyes as her son was led away. "Be strong, my son," she whispered. "The gods are watching." As he was escorted to the council's meeting place, Obinna's thoughts raced. He needed to convince the elders that he was not acting of his own will, that something far darker was at work. But how could he explain the uncontrollable urges, the voices in his head, the strange markings on his skin? The council chamber was an open-air hut at the edge of the village, surrounded by ancient trees that seemed to lean in, listening. The elders sat in a semicircle, their faces weathered and stern. The air was thick with incense, the smoke curling in delicate tendrils as if the spirits themselves were present. Elder Ease, the oldest and most respected among them, rose to speak. "Obinna, son of Pastor Nduka, you stand accused of bringing dishonor to your family and endangering the village. What do you have to say for yourself?" Obinna swallowed hard. I am not in control of myself," he began, his voice shaky but determined. "There is a curse upon me, something that drives me to do things I would never do willingly." The elders exchanged skeptical glances. "A curse?" Elder Okafor, the village priest, scoffed. "Or is this simply a convenient excuse for your misdeeds?" "No," Obinna insisted, stepping forward. "I sought the help of Amara, the healer. She confirmed it. There are markings on my skin, voices in my head. I am fighting something beyond my control." The mention of Amara's name caused a stir among the elders. "You mean the woman who dabbles in dark arts?" Elder Okafor's eyes narrowed. "Do you think we are fools, Obinna? Seeking help from such a woman only proves your guilt." Obinna's heart sank. He had hoped that revealing Amara's involvement would lend credibility to his story, but it seemed to have had the opposite effect. The elders whispered among themselves, their voices a low murmur that sent chills down his spine. Before they could pass judgment, a commotion erupted outside the hut. The crowd parted as Amara herself appeared, her dark eyes flashing with defiance. "Let me speak," she demanded, her voice cutting through the tense air. Elder Ease hesitated, but gestured for her to step forward. Amara approached the council, her gaze fixed on Obinna. "The boy speaks the truth," she said, her tone unwavering. "He is indeed cursed, but not by his own doing." The elders leaned in, their interest piqued. "And who, then, is responsible for this curse?" Elder Ease asked. Amara's eyes flickered, and for a moment, Obinna thought he saw a glint of something sinister in her gaze. "The curse is tied to the sins of his family," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "There are secrets in his father's past that have brought this darkness upon them." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Obinna's mind reeled. His father? How could that be true? His father was a devout man, respected by everyone in the village. What could he have done to warrant such a terrible curse? Before Obinna could press Amara for more answers, Elder Okafor interrupted. "Enough," he barked. "Whether this is true or not, it does not excuse the harm Obinna has caused. He will remain under watch, and if his actions continue, his family will be exiled." Obinna's blood ran cold. Exile meant death. His family would lose their home, their land, their place in the village. They would be forced to wander, with no one to help them. As he was led away, Obinna's mind raced with questions. Was Amara truly trying to help him, or was she leading him down a darker path? And what was the secret from his father's past that could be tied to the curse? Cliffhanger ending. That night, as Obinna returned home, he found a crumpled piece of parchment slipped under his door. It was a letter in his father's handwriting, hinting at an old agreement made with someone powerful. The letter mentioned a name that sent chills down Obinna's spine, Ikemba, the feared sorcerer of the neighboring village. Obinna stared at the letter, dread pooling in his stomach. The more he uncovered, the deeper the darkness seemed to grow. Whatever secrets his father had kept buried, they were now coming back to destroy them all. Night had settled over Obu, and the air was thick with tension. Obinna could hardly concentrate as he sat at the small table in his family's hut, staring at the crumpled letter he had found earlier. The name, Ikemba, stood out like a curse on the page. His father had always spoken of the sorcerer with fear and disdain, warning his children to never stray near the borders of the neighboring village where Ikemba held power. "What have you done, father?" Obinna muttered to himself, clutching the letter tightly. He knew he needed answers, but with his father bedridden and barely conscious, there was no one left to ask. A faint creak from behind him made Obinna turn. His younger sister, Nkechi, stood in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. "Obinna, you've been sitting there for hours," she said softly. "You're going to wear yourself out." "I have no choice, Nkechi," he replied, rubbing his tired eyes. "Whatever this curse is, it's connected to something father did years ago. But I can't figure it out on my own." Nkechi hesitated, her gaze darting around nervously. Obinna noticed her unease, a slight trembling in her hands. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. She bit her lip, clearly torn. "There's something I need to tell you, but you must promise not to get angry." Obinna's brow furrowed. "What is it?" Taking a deep breath, Nkechi moved closer and lowered her voice. "I've been meeting with someone. Someone from Ikemba's village." The shock hit Obinna like a slap. "What? Are you mad, Nkechi? Do you know the danger you're putting yourself in?" His voice was a harsh whisper, mindful of their mother sleeping in the next room. Nkechi's eyes welled up with tears. "I know it's risky, but I love him, Obinna. His name is Chikwudi, and he's not like the others in his village. He's kind, and he's helped me in ways you can't understand." Obinna stared at her, disbelief and anger roiling inside him. "Do you have any idea what father would say if he found out? Our family is on the brink of being exiled, and now you're telling me you've been sneaking around with the son of our enemies? It's not like that." Nkechi shot back, her voice breaking. "Chikwudi, he's been trying to help me understand what's happening to you. He knows things about Ikemba's magic, secrets that could help us break the curse." Obinna's anger faltered at her words. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone softening. Nkechi wiped away a tear and leaned in closer. "Chikwudi told me that Ikemba's magic is fueled by old grudges, by the hatred he's held for decades. He believes that whatever curse is on you is tied to something that happened between our family and his. If we could find out what that was, maybe we could stop it." Obinna's mind raced. Could this stranger from the neighboring village really hold the key to lifting the curse? The idea seemed too convenient, but Obinna was desperate for answers. His father's condition was worsening by the hour, and the council's threat of exile hung over their heads like a noose. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Obinna demanded. "I was scared," Nkechi admitted, her voice trembling. "You've been under so much pressure, and I didn't want to add to it. But now I think Chikwudi might be our only hope." Before Obinna could respond, there was a sudden knock at the door, urgent and loud. Both siblings froze, exchanging fearful glances. Obinna gestured for Nkechi to hide, then moved cautiously toward the door. When he opened it, he found Elder Okafor standing there, flanked by two stern-faced guards. The priest's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene inside the hut. "Obinna," he said coldly, "the council has called for an emergency meeting. There are new accusations against you." Obinna's heart sank. "What now?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "A widow has accused you of approaching her last night inappropriately," Okafor said, his voice dripping with disdain. "She claims you tried to take advantage of her." Obinna's blood ran cold. He had no memory of such an encounter, but after what had happened with Amina during the festival, he couldn't be sure. The curse seemed to take control of him at its own whim, making him do things that horrified him. "This is a lie." Nkechi cried out, stepping forward from her hiding place. My brother would never. Silence, girl, Okafor snapped. If Obinna continues to bring disgrace upon this village, your entire family will be exiled. I suggest you prepare to face the council. Obinna's world seemed to spin out of control. He couldn't understand why this was happening to him. If Jeopardy truly knew secrets about Ikemba's curse, then perhaps he could help clear his name before it was too late. But could he trust a man from the village that had cursed him? Cliffhanger ending. As Elder Okafor turned to leave, he paused and looked back at Obinna. If you want any chance of saving your family, you'll meet with the council tomorrow. But be warned, there are those among us who believe exile is too merciful for what you've done. As the door slammed shut, Nkechi turned to her brother with desperation in her eyes. Obinna, we have to speak to Jeopardy. He might be our only chance. Obinna looked down at the glowing markings on his arms, the symbols pulsing faintly as if in response to his fear. He nodded slowly. Fine, but if he's lying to you, Nkechi, I won't forgive him. Nkechi nodded, determination in her eyes. I believe in him, Obinna. He'll help us. He has to. The siblings were left alone in the dimly lit hut, knowing that the dawn would bring with it another confrontation with the council, and potentially the end of their lives in the village if they couldn't find a way to break the curse in time. Obinna couldn't sleep that night. The weight of his family's fate pressed down on him like a physical force, suffocating him. The flickering light of the oil lamp cast shadows on the walls, and every creak of the wooden beams overhead sent a chill down his spine. The council's threats, the new accusations against him, and the revelation of Nkechi's secret love affair with Jeopardy all swirled in his mind like a storm. Nkechi had fallen asleep in the corner of the hut, exhaustion etched on her face. Obinna watched her, torn between frustration and concern. Jeopardy's information might be their last chance, but what if it was a trap? Ikemba's reputation as a merciless sorcerer was well known throughout the villages. Could his son truly be trusted? As dawn's first light began to break, Obinna knew he couldn't waste any more time. He had to find out the truth about the curse before it destroyed them all. His father's labored breathing from the next room was a constant reminder that they were running out of time. He reached for the crumpled letter he had found hidden beneath his father's bed the previous night. The parchment was old and brittle, the ink faded in places. But as he read it again, his eyes were drawn to one passage. I, Induka, agree to the terms set forth by Ikemba. In exchange for prosperity and protection, I pledge my firstborn to fulfill the covenant should I break this pact. Obinna's breath caught in his throat. The words blurred before his eyes, and his hands trembled. His father had made a deal with Ikemba, the very sorcerer who was now haunting their family. But what did it mean that he had pledged his firstborn? Had Obinna been cursed from birth? The realization struck him like a blow. The curse had never been about him alone, it was the price his father had agreed to pay. Rage and betrayal swirled within him. How could his father have kept the secret? How could he have condemned his own son to such a fate? Determined to find answers, Obinna made his way to his father's bedside. The old man was a shadow of his former self, his once strong and proud frame now withered. His eyes fluttered open, dull and filled with pain. Father, Obinna whispered, kneeling beside him. I found your letter. I know about the pact you made with Ikemba. Why did you do it? Why did you curse me? His father's eyes widened, panic flickering in their depths. For a moment, he struggled to speak, but only a faint croak escaped his lips. Obinna leaned closer, desperation clawing at him. Please, father, you have to tell me the truth. What did you do? With great effort, his father managed to rasp, I had no choice, Obinna. I did it for our family. He gasped for breath, his frail body shaking with the effort. The drought, it was killing us. Ikemba, he offered me prosperity, but I broke the terms. Obinna's heart clenched. What terms did you break? He demanded. What was the price? His father's eyes filled with tears, a broken sob escaping him. I was supposed to give you to him when you came of age. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't give up my son. So I tried to run, tried to hide. The pieces fell into place. By refusing to hand over Obinna, his father had broken the covenant, and now they were all paying the price. The curse had been placed on Obinna as punishment for his father's betrayal. Ikemba will never stop, his father whispered, his voice barely audible. He will take everything from us, unless you fulfill the pact. Obinna's blood ran cold. Fulfill the pact? Did that mean sacrificing himself to end the curse? The very thought sent a shiver down his spine, but if it was the only way to save his family. Before he could press his father for more details, a loud banging erupted at the door. Obinna's mother rushed in, her eyes wide with fear. The elders have come, she whispered urgently. They're demanding you meet with the council now. Panic surged through Obinna. The council meeting wasn't supposed to be until later that day. What had changed? There was no time to lose. He gave his father's hand one last squeeze, then hurried to the door. As he stepped outside, he was met with the grim faces of Elder Ease and several guards. Behind them, the villagers had gathered, whispering amongst themselves. The air was thick with suspicion and anger. Obinna, Elder Ease said sternly, we have received new evidence against you. Another villager claims you attacked her last night. That's impossible, Obinna protested. I was here with my family. We have witnesses, Elder Okafor added coldly. This cannot continue. If you are truly cursed, then for the safety of the village, you must be exiled. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Obinna's mother let out a strangled cry, and Nkechi, who had just emerged from the hut, looked as if she might faint. Desperation clawed at Obinna. Please, he pleaded, give me a chance to prove my innocence. There's a sorcerer behind this, a curse that was placed on me because of an old pact. I can break it, but I need time. The elders exchanged doubtful glances, their skepticism palpable. You have until the next full moon, Elder Ease finally declared. If you cannot lift this curse by then, you and your family will be banished from Obu forever. Obinna nodded, relief mixed with dread. The next full moon was less than 2 weeks away. Time was running out, and he was no closer to finding a way to break the curse. But he had one lead left, Jeopardy, the son of the very sorcerer who had cursed them. Cliffhanger ending. As the crowd began to disperse, Nkechi grabbed Obinna's arm. We need to go to Jeopardy, she whispered urgently. If anyone knows how to undo Ikemba's curse, it's him. But you have to trust me. Obinna looked into his sister's pleading eyes and knew he had no other choice. Fine, he said, his voice heavy with resolve. Tonight, we go to the Forbidden Village. The path before him was fraught with danger, but if he didn't confront Ikemba's son, his family's future would be sealed. The moon was hidden behind a thick veil of clouds as Obinna and Nkechi slipped silently out of their hut. The village lay in darkness, save for a few flickering torches lighting the paths. Obinna's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing like a drum in his ears. He knew what they were about to do was dangerous, but there was no other way. The deadline set by the elders hung over them like a blade. As they crept through the village, Obinna glanced over at his sister. Nkechi's face was set in grim determination, but her eyes betrayed her fear. Are you sure Jeopardy will meet us? Obinna whispered. He promised he would be there, Nkechi replied softly. If anyone can help us break this curse, it's him. But we have to reach the edge of the forest before dawn. The path to the Forbidden Village was treacherous. For years, they had been warned never to cross into the dense forest that bordered Obu. Legends told of malevolent spirits, strange creatures, and traps set by the sorcerer Ikemba to ward off intruders. Tonight, they would have to face those dangers head-on. The forest loomed ahead like a wall of darkness, the trees standing like silent sentinels. As they entered, the air grew colder, and the chirping of insects and distant cries of night creatures filled the air. Obinna's eyes darted around, every rustle of leaves sending a chill down his spine. Stay close, he whispered to Nkechi, gripping her hand tightly. The deeper they went, the thicker the fog became, swirling around their ankles like ghostly tendrils. It was as if the forest itself was alive, trying to pull them into its depths. The markings on Obinna's arms began to glow faintly, casting an eerie light that seemed to dance with the shadows. Your marks. They're reacting to something, Nkechi said, her voice trembling. I know, Obinna muttered. It's the curse. I can feel it, like it's pulling me toward something. They pushed on, each step heavier than the last. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached a small clearing. The fog thinned, revealing a figure standing at the far edge, half hidden in shadow. Chukwudi, Nkechi called softly, her voice tinged with relief. The figure stepped forward, and the faint light from Obinna's glowing markings illuminated his face. Chukwudi was tall and lean, his features sharp, with an intensity in his eyes that made Obinna wary. You came, Chukwudi said, his voice low and steady. I wasn't sure if you would make it. We don't have much time, Obinna said, stepping forward. The council has given me until the next full moon to break this curse. If we fail, my family will be exiled. I need to know everything about the pact between my father and your father. Chukwudi nodded, his expression unreadable. I'll help you, but you must understand, my father's magic is not something you can simply undo. It's rooted in ancient rituals, bound by blood and hatred. The curse on you was born from a betrayal that has festered for decades. Obinna clenched his fists, trying to rein in his frustration. I already know about the pact. My father agreed to it, then broke his promise. But what I don't understand is why Ikemba chose to curse me instead of taking his vengeance on my father directly. Chukwudi's gaze flickered to Nkechi, then back to Obinna. Your father was supposed to offer you to my father as a disciple, a payment for the protection he received. But when the time came, your father hid you away. Ikemba saw this as the ultimate betrayal. Obinna's heart sank. He had always believed his father was a good man, a man of faith. But now he was discovering a past filled with secrets and lies. So how do we break the curse? He asked desperately. There must be a way. There is one way, Chukwudi said slowly, his eyes darkening. But it will require you to face the spirits that guard the heart of this forest. Only they can lift the curse, if they choose to. The spirits? Nkechi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. But they're said to be merciless. No one who has sought their favor has ever returned. Chukwudi's expression softened as he looked at Nkechi. That's true, he admitted. But you have no other choice. The curse is bound to your bloodline, Obinna. If you don't break it before the full moon, it will consume not just you, but everyone you hold dear. Obinna's resolve hardened. Then I'll do it. Tell me what I need to do. Chukwudi reached into his cloak and pulled out a small, ancient-looking scroll. This map will guide you to the hidden shrine deep within the forest. The spirits that dwell there will test you. If they deem you worthy, they may lift the curse. But if they find you lacking, they'll kill me, Obinna finished grimly. Chukwudi nodded. Yes, and they won't hesitate to take your sister as well if they see fit. Nkechi squeezed Obinna's arm. We'll face it together, she said, her voice filled with determination. We don't have a choice. Very well, Chukwudi said, handing the scroll to Obinna. But be warned, Ikemba knows you are here. He will not let you reach the shrine easily. His traps are set all throughout the forest. Be careful. As they turned to leave, Chukwudi grabbed Nkechi's hand, pulling her close. Be safe, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I will be waiting for you. Obinna watched their exchange with a mix of suspicion and gratitude. Chukwudi's help had been invaluable, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the sorcerer's son had his own agenda. Cliffhanger ending. As they made their way deeper into the forest, the ground suddenly shook, and a blood-curdling howl echoed through the trees. The air grew thick with the scent of decay, and the fog around them turned an unnatural, sickly green. Obinna froze. What was that? Nkechi's eyes widened in terror. It's one of Ikemba's creatures. We need to run. Before they could react, shadows began to move all around them, closing in. The forest had come alive, and they were its prey. The forest had turned into a nightmare. The green fog seemed to thicken with each step, obscuring Obinna's vision as he tried to navigate through the dense underbrush. Every shadow appeared to shift, every rustle of leaves sent chills down his spine. The howl they had heard moments before still echoed in his ears, a haunting reminder that they were not alone. Nkechi, stay close, Obinna whispered, tightening his grip on the scroll Chukwudi had given him. The map was their only guide through this maze of darkness. We can't afford to get lost. Nkechi nodded, her eyes wide with fear. The forest was alive with unnatural sounds, a faint whispering that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The markings on Obinna's arms had started glowing more intensely, casting an eerie light around them. He could feel the curse pulsing beneath his skin, reacting to the malevolent forces that surrounded them. After what felt like hours, they finally stumbled into a small clearing. In the center stood an ancient stone altar, covered in moss and strange runes that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. "This must be the place Jeopardy spoke of," Obinna said, his voice barely louder than a whisper. Before Nkechi could respond, they heard a low, sinister chuckle behind them. Spinning around, Obinna came face to face with Amara, the village healer. Her dark eyes gleamed with a mix of amusement and malice as she stepped out from the shadows. "Amara," Obinna gasped, disbelief flooding him. "What are you doing here?" Amara's smile widened. "Oh, Obinna, did you really think I was just a simple healer? You've been so naive." She stepped closer, her gaze flicking to the glowing markings on his arms. "I've been waiting for this moment for a long time." Confusion and betrayal warred within Obinna. You gave me that potion to help my father. You said you were trying to break the curse." Amara laughed, the sound cold and hollow. "Oh, Obinna, that potion? It was never meant to help you. It was meant to weaken you, to make the curse tighten its grip on you even more. The more you relied on my help, the deeper you sank into Ikemba's trap." Nkechi's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you do this?" she demanded. "What have we ever done to you?" Amara's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold determination. "Your father's broken pact with Ikemba left me with nothing," she hissed. "Years ago, I was promised power beyond imagination if I helped seal that pact. But when your father reneged, Ikemba's wrath turned on me as well. I've been waiting for my revenge ever since." Obinna's hands balled into fists, anger burning hot in his chest. "You betrayed us all for your own greed. You're no better than Ikemba." Amara's eyes blazed with fury. "You don't understand the power I seek, Obinna. You think you're the only one who's lost something? This curse will end with your family's bloodline, and I will finally gain the strength I was promised." Before Obinna could react, Amara raised her hands, muttering a chant under her breath. The ground beneath them trembled, and dark tendrils of mist began to rise from the earth, coiling around Obinna and Nkechi's legs like serpents. "Run, Nkechi!" Obinna shouted, struggling to break free. But the mist tightened its grip, pulling him toward the altar. He could feel the curse reacting, the markings on his arms burning like fire. Nkechi hesitated, torn between helping her brother and saving herself. But as Amara's magic intensified, she made a desperate choice. "I'll find Jeopardy," she cried, turning and sprinting back into the forest. Obinna gritted his teeth, trying to resist the pull of the dark magic, but it was no use. Amara's spell was too powerful. "What do you want from me?" he gasped, his strength ebbing. Amara's smile was triumphant. "Your blood, Obinna. It's the key to lifting the final seal on Ikemba's curse. With it, I'll gain power that even Ikemba could only dream of." Before she could strike, however, a sudden flash of light filled the clearing. The dark mist recoiled, and Amara screamed in fury as Jeopardy burst through the trees, a glowing talisman clutched in his hand. "Get away from him!" Jeopardy shouted, the talisman blazing with a light so bright it forced Amara to retreat. The tendrils of mist dissolved, freeing Obinna from their grasp. Amara's eyes narrowed as she faced Jeopardy. "You traitor! You would turn against your own father for these fools." Jeopardy stepped forward, shielding Obinna with his body. "This was never about my father," he said, his voice steady. "This is about breaking the cycle of hatred that has destroyed too many lives." Seizing the moment, Obinna scrambled to his feet. "We need to get to the shrine," Jeopardy urged. "It's the only place where the spirits can lift the curse. Amara won't follow us there." With no time to argue, Obinna nodded, and they turned to flee deeper into the forest. Amara's shrieks of rage followed them, but she did not pursue. The power of Jeopardy's talisman kept her at bay, at least for now. As they ran, The forest seemed to shift around them, the trees moving as if trying to block their path. The scroll in Obinna's hand glowed faintly, guiding them forward. But just as they reached the entrance to the hidden shrine, the ground beneath them gave way, and they fell into darkness. Obinna's last thought before everything went black was that this curse was far more powerful than he had ever imagined. And if they didn't find a way to break it soon, it would consume them all. The world around Obinna was a blur of darkness and swirling shadows as he fell. His body slammed against rough stone, and pain exploded through his side. He gasped, struggling to catch his breath as he realized they had fallen into an underground cavern. The air was damp and cold, filled with the scent of earth and decay. "Obinna, are you all right?" Nkechi's voice called out from somewhere nearby. "I'm fine," he groaned, forcing himself to stand despite the searing pain in his ribs. He could see Nkechi a few feet away, rubbing her bruised knees. Jeopardy, who had fallen with them, was already on his feet, scanning their surroundings. The dim glow from Obinna's markings provided just enough light to reveal jagged walls and a narrow tunnel leading deeper underground. The scroll in Obinna's hand still pulsed with a faint light, urging them forward. "Where are we?" Nkechi asked, her voice trembling with fear. Jeopardy's face was grim. "This must be one of the hidden passageways that lead to the ancient shrine. It's said that these tunnels were built to protect the spirit's sanctuary from intruders. We have to keep moving before Amara finds another way to reach us." Obinna nodded, clutching the scroll tighter. "Let's go. We're running out of time." As they made their way through the dark tunnel, the oppressive weight of the curse grew heavier on Obinna's shoulders. His father's words echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of the terrible pact that had cursed their family. The thought of his father lying on his deathbed and his mother's desperate prayers fueled his determination to find a way to end this once and for all. The tunnel twisted and turned, and every so often they would hear distant echoes that made Nkechi flinch. Obinna could feel the presence of dark magic growing stronger with each step. The closer they got to the shrine, the more intense the burning sensation on his arms became. Finally, they emerged into a vast underground chamber. In the center stood an ancient altar, surrounded by statues of long-forgotten deities. The air was thick with an otherworldly energy that made Obinna's skin crawl. The markings on his arms blazed brighter than ever, casting eerie shadows across the stone walls. "This is it," Jeopardy whispered. "The spirits dwell here. If you wish to break the curse, you must make an offering." Obinna turned to him, desperation in his eyes. "What kind of offering?" Before Jeopardy could answer, a soft voice echoed through the chamber, filled with sorrow and determination. "One that will require the deepest sacrifice." Obinna spun around to see his mother stepping out from the shadows. She was pale and frail, her eyes filled with both love and pain. "Mother? How did you get here?" he asked, shocked to see her. "I followed you," she said softly, her voice cracking with emotion. "I couldn't stay behind and do nothing while my children risked everything. The spirits called to me, Obinna. They told me what must be done." Nkechi rushed to her side, tears streaming down her face. "Mother, you shouldn't be here. It's too dangerous." But their mother shook her head. "No, my child. It is my place to be here." She turned to Obinna, her gaze unwavering. "The spirits have shown me the truth. The curse will only be broken by the sacrifice of the one who broke the original pact." Obinna's heart stopped. "No. Mother, you can't mean." "Yes," she said, her voice filled with a quiet strength. "Your father's betrayal has doomed us all, but it is my blood that must pay the price. The spirits demand it." Obinna's mind reeled. He couldn't accept it. He had come all this way, endured so much, only to hear that his mother would have to die to save them. "No! I can't let you do this," he cried, stepping forward to stop her. But she held up her hand, silencing him. "Obinna, listen to me," she said, tears filling her eyes. "I have made my peace with this. You and your sister still have a chance at life. If my death can lift this curse and save you, then it is a price I am willing to pay." Jeopardy stepped forward, his expression torn. "She's right, Obinna. The spirits demand a sacrifice bound by the blood of the original agreement. It's the only way. No! Nkechi screamed, clutching their mother's arm. There has to be another way. We can't lose you. Obinna's heart broke at the sight of his sister's desperate plea. But he could see the resolve in their mother's eyes. She had made up her mind, and nothing he said would change it. With a heavy heart, Obinna turned to the altar, his hands shaking. The spirits whispered in his mind, urging him to accept the sacrifice. Do it, they seemed to chant. The curse will end, but only with her blood. Obinna's mother approached the altar, her steps slow but steady. She took his hands in hers, her touch warm and comforting even in this moment of impending doom. You must live, my son, she whispered. You must live for those who cannot. As tears streamed down his face, Obinna raised the ceremonial blade that Chukwudi had handed him. He couldn't see through his tears, couldn't breathe through the pain in his chest. But he had to do it. He had to save his family. With a single, swift motion, he brought the blade down. The chamber filled with a blinding light, and the ground trembled as if the earth itself was mourning her loss. A powerful gust of wind surged through the cavern, extinguishing the torches and plunging them into darkness. For a moment, all was silent. Then, the markings on Obinna's arms faded, and he felt the curse lift from his soul like a heavy shroud. His mother's body lay still on the altar, her face peaceful in death. Nkechi collapsed beside her, sobbing uncontrollably. But the curse was gone. Obinna could feel it. The chains that had bound him were broken. The voices in his head were silent at last. But as relief washed over him, Chukwudi's face darkened. The curse may be broken, he said quietly, but there is another price to pay. Before Obinna could ask what he meant, a deep, malevolent laugh echoed through the cavern. The ground beneath them trembled once more, and the statues around the shrine began to crack. The voice of Ikemba filled the chamber, a mocking tone that sent chills down Obinna's spine. Did you really think it would be so easy? The blood sacrifice may have lifted one curse, but there are darker forces at play. You have only just begun to pay for your family's sins. Obinna's heart sank as he realized that the fight was far from over. They had made one sacrifice, but it seemed the darkness that plagued his family was not yet satisfied. The echoes of Ikemba's laughter still reverberated through the cavern, sending chills down Obinna's spine. The sacrifice of his mother had lifted the curse, yet they were far from being free. The ground beneath them trembled, and the air was thick with an ominous presence. Obinna's knees buckled as exhaustion and grief overwhelmed him. His hands were still stained with his mother's blood, and he couldn't tear his eyes away from her lifeless form on the cold altar. Nkechi knelt beside their mother, her cries filled with anguish. Why wasn't it enough? She sobbed, clutching her mother's hand. She gave her life. What more do they want? Chukwudi, who had been watching silently, stepped forward, his face pale and drawn. I don't understand, he muttered, shaking his head. The spirits should have been appeased. This was supposed to end the curse. As Obinna struggled to steady himself, the scroll he had been clutching in his hand began to glow faintly again. The markings on his arms, which had faded after the sacrifice, were now slowly returning, as if something dark was reawakening within him. No, Obinna whispered, shaking his head. This can't be happening. We did everything the spirits asked. We gave them the blood they demanded. But as if in response, a cold wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing the last remaining torches. The darkness was absolute, swallowing every flicker of light. Obinna's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the curse stirring, like a serpent awakening from its slumber. We need to leave, Chukwudi said urgently, grabbing Obinna's arm. This place is no longer safe. The spirits, they are angry. But before they could move, a voice, cold and ancient, filled the air. You have lifted one curse, but another remains. Blood alone cannot pay for the sins of your ancestors. A blinding flash of light erupted from the altar, forcing Obinna and Nkechi to shield their eyes. When the light faded, they found themselves no longer in the cavern. The air around them had changed. They were standing in a vast, open field under a sky streaked with red, as if painted with the blood of the innocent. What is this place? Nkechi whispered, clutching Obinna's arm in terror. Obinna looked around, confused. The ground was littered with bones, and in the distance, dark figures moved like shadows against the horizon. This is not the physical world, Chukwudi said, his voice trembling. We've been pulled into the spirit realm. Before Obinna could process what was happening, the ancient voice spoke again, echoing all around them. You have come seeking freedom from the curse, but the blood of one is not enough. To end this cycle, a heart must be weighed, a heart filled with true love, willing to sacrifice without expectation. Obinna's eyes widened in shock. What are you saying? He called out, his voice cracking. What more do you want from us? The ground beneath them shifted, and they found themselves standing before a massive, ethereal figure, a towering spirit with eyes like burning coals. The spirit's presence was overwhelming, filling the air with an oppressive energy that made it hard to breathe. You must prove the purity of your heart, the spirit said, its voice like 1,000 whispers overlapping. One among you must share the burden of the curse willingly, not out of obligation, but out of love. Obinna's mind spun. How could they possibly pass this test? His mother had already sacrificed herself, and yet the spirits demanded more. What did they mean by a willing heart? Nkechi stepped forward, her voice trembling but steady. If it is more blood you seek, take mine, she said, tears streaming down her face. I would give my life to save my brother. But the spirit shook its massive head. Your sacrifice is made from guilt and duty. It will not satisfy the balance. The heart we seek must offer itself freely, with no burden of debt. Chukwudi, who had been standing silently, suddenly stepped forward. Then take me, he said, his eyes meeting Obinna's. I have no debt to your family, no obligation to help you. But I would do it, for Nkechi. Obinna stared at Chukwudi in shock. What are you saying? You would give your life for her? Yes, Chukwudi said simply. I would. I have seen the darkness that plagues your family, and I have chosen to stand against it. Not because I am bound to you, but because I love her. Nkechi gasped, her eyes widening. Chukwudi, no. I won't let you do this. The spirit seemed to consider Chukwudi's words, its burning eyes focused on him. You offer your heart freely, knowing the cost, it asked. Chukwudi nodded. Yes. I would rather die than see Nkechi suffer any longer. Obinna watched, torn between hope and despair. Could this truly be the answer? Would Chukwudi's sacrifice be enough to finally end the curse? But just as the spirit began to reach for Chukwudi, a new voice rang out, strong and defiant. Stop. Adora, Obinna's childhood friend, burst into the scene, seemingly out of nowhere. Her eyes blazed with determination as she stepped between Chukwudi and the spirit. Adora? Obinna gasped, completely taken aback. How did you get here? I've been following you, she said breathlessly. I couldn't just stand by while you faced this alone. She turned to the spirit, her chin held high. If a willing heart is what you seek, then take mine. I have loved Obinna my entire life. Let my sacrifice break the curse. The spirit paused, its gaze shifting between Chukwudi and Adora. Two hearts offered freely, both filled with love, it said, a note of curiosity in its voice. But only one is needed. Nkechi sobbed, shaking her head. No more sacrifices. Please, just end this nightmare. The spirit's eyes softened, and it reached out, touching Adora lightly on the forehead. A radiant light engulfed her, and for a moment, Obinna feared they were about to lose her too. But then the light faded, and Adora fell to her knees, exhausted but alive. It is done, the spirit declared. The curse is broken. Obinna's knees gave way, and he collapsed to the ground, tears streaming down his face. The markings on his arms dissolved into nothing, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he could breathe freely. The chains that had bound his soul had finally shattered. But as they began to embrace, relieved that their nightmare was finally over, the ground beneath them shook violently. The sky above darkened once more, and a chilling voice, even more ancient than the spirits, filled the air. You have broken the curse of the spirits, it hissed, but you have yet to face me. I am the darkness that even the spirits fear. Your trials are far from over. The ground cracked open beneath Obinna's feet, and he was plunged into darkness once again. The darkness seemed endless. Obinna felt as though he were falling through a void, the ground gone from beneath his feet. He tried to reach out, to grab onto something, anything, but there was nothing but the cold, oppressive blackness that surrounded him. The voice that had taunted him earlier was silent now, replaced by a bone-chilling stillness. Then, just as suddenly as the darkness had swallowed him, Obinna's feet hit solid ground. He stumbled forward, gasping for breath. He found himself in a dimly lit chamber, the air thick with the scent of ancient incense and decay. The flickering light from torches cast long, wavering shadows on the stone walls, revealing carvings of monstrous figures and scenes of torment. Nkechi, Jeopardy, and Adaora were beside him, their faces pale and eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Where are we?" Nkechi asked, clutching her brother's arm. "I don't know," Obinna replied, his voice barely a whisper. "But it's not over." That voice, it was different from the spirits. "I fear we're facing something far worse." Adaora took a step forward, her face set with determination despite the fear in her eyes. "Whatever this place is, we need to find a way out. The curse may have been broken, but something is keeping us here." As they gathered their bearings, Jeopardy pointed to an inscription carved into the stone wall. "Look," he said, his voice filled with a mix of awe and dread. "These markings, they speak of an ancient curse tied to your bloodline, Obinna." Obinna approached the wall, tracing the markings with his fingers. The language was old, but somehow he could understand it. The more he read, the more his heart sank. The bloodline of Induka shall be forever bound by the sins of their ancestors. The cycle of darkness and betrayal will pass from generation to generation until one makes the ultimate sacrifice to break it. A cold realization hit Obinna. The curse that had plagued him was not merely a result of his father's broken pact with Ikemba. It went back much further, to an ancestor whose actions had cursed their entire bloodline. "This isn't just about my father," Obinna said, his voice shaking. "This curse, it's older than we thought. My family has been paying for the sins of our ancestors for generations." Nkechi's eyes filled with tears. "But we've already lost so much. Mother, she gave her life. What more do they want from us?" Before Obinna could answer, the chamber filled with a low, rumbling laugh. The walls seemed to vibrate with the sound, and the torches flickered wildly. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and a dark mist began to seep through the cracks in the stone. "Fools," the voice hissed, echoing through the chamber. "Did you truly think that the blood of one woman could erase centuries of betrayal and darkness?" From the shadows emerged a towering figure cloaked in darkness, its eyes glowing like embers. Obinna's heart sank as he realized who it was. "Ikemba," he breathed, his voice barely more than a whisper. The sorcerer's laughter filled the chamber, cruel and mocking. "Your mother's sacrifice was touching, but ultimately futile," Ikemba said, his voice dripping with malice. "You may have lifted the spirit's curse, but the curse of your bloodline is mine to command. And I am not so easily appeased." Adaora stepped forward, her voice strong despite the fear in her eyes. "What do you want, Ikemba? What will it take to end this?" Ikemba's eyes flickered with amusement. "What do I want? I want vengeance. Your ancestor stole something precious from me, a power that was meant to be mine. And now you, Obinna, will pay the price for his treachery." Obinna's mind whirled. "What did my ancestor steal from you?" he demanded, his anger rising. "What crime did he commit that condemns us all?" Ikemba's eyes blazed with fury. "Your ancestor Induka was once my apprentice. He betrayed me, stealing a powerful artifact that held the essence of my magic. With it, he sealed away my powers and bound my spirit to the shadows. But that seal is weakening, and your bloodline is the key to breaking it." The ground trembled again, and Obinna could feel the dark magic pressing in on him. "So that's why you curse my family," he said bitterly. "To reclaim the power that was taken from you." "Yes," Ikemba hissed. "And now, with the blood sacrifice your mother made, the seal is weakened. But to fully release my power, I require one final sacrifice, yours, Obinna." Nkechi gasped and clutched Obinna's arm. "No, you can't," she cried. "There has to be another way." But Ikemba's gaze was unyielding. "The blood of the one who carries the markings of the curse must be spilled. Only then will I be free." Obinna's mind raced. He couldn't let this end with his death. He had to find a way to break the cycle of vengeance that had consumed both Ikemba and his own family. He looked at Chukwudi, Adaora, and Nkechi, the people who had risked everything to help him. "There's always a way," Chukwudi whispered fiercely. "We just have to find it." Obinna took a deep breath, stepping forward to face Ikemba. "I won't let you win," he said, his voice steady. "My family has suffered enough. This ends now." Ikemba's laughter echoed once more, but this time it was cut short as Adaora lifted the talisman she had brought from the shrine. Its light pierced through the darkness, forcing Ikemba to recoil. "You think your trinkets can stop me?" he snarled. But as the light from the talisman grew stronger, the carvings on the walls began to glow. The ancient inscriptions reacted to the power of the talisman, revealing a hidden passage that led deeper into the chamber. "Obinna," Adaora shouted. "This is our chance. The inscriptions say there's a way to bind Ikemba's spirit forever, but we have to reach the source of his power." Without hesitation, Obinna grabbed Nkechi's hand and charged toward the passage. Chukwudi and Adaora followed close behind, the light of the talisman keeping Ikemba at bay. Cliffhanger ending. As they raced down the dark corridor, the ground shook violently, and the walls began to close in around them. Obinna could hear Ikemba's enraged screams echoing behind them, his dark magic trying to seal their escape. Ahead, a faint glow beckoned, the last hope of sealing Ikemba's power once and for all. But as they neared the source, a new, even darker presence loomed before them, something far older and more powerful than Ikemba. Obinna's heart sank as he realized that Ikemba was not the true enemy. There was a deeper, darker force at play, one that had been manipulating them all from the shadows. Obinna's lungs burned as he sprinted down the narrowing corridor, the sound of Ikemba's furious screams echoing behind him. The wall seemed to pulse with dark energy, closing in as if trying to crush him and his companions. The air was thick with the scent of ancient magic, each breath tinged with the bitterness of decay. "Keep moving," Obinna shouted, gripping Nkechi's hand tightly. He could hear her ragged breaths and knew she was struggling to keep up, but they couldn't stop now. Behind them, the walls trembled, cracks forming in the stone as Ikemba's dark magic surged, trying to trap them. Adaora, holding the glowing talisman, was at the front, her face set in fierce determination. The light from the talisman seemed to repel the darkness that threatened to swallow them whole, but Obinna could see the strain in her eyes. Chukwudi, running alongside them, cast worried glances over his shoulder. "We can't keep this up," Chukwudi yelled. "The magic is too strong. If we don't find the source soon, we'll be buried alive." Just as despair began to creep into Obinna's heart, the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. The air was warmer here, the oppressive darkness less intense. In the center of the chamber stood a massive stone pedestal, atop which rested an ancient, intricately carved box that seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly glow. "That's it," Adaora cried out. "The source of Ikemba's power." Obinna's heart skipped a beat. The box was covered in the same markings that had appeared on his arms, symbols of ancient magic that tied his family's bloodline to the curse. As he approached, the markings on his skin began to glow in response, resonating with the energy of the box. But before he could reach it, a blast of dark energy erupted behind them, throwing them to the ground. Ikemba materialized in the entrance of the chamber, his eyes burning with fury. His once human form now twisted and monstrous, cloaked in shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. "You think you can escape me?" Ikemba hissed, his voice like the rumble of distant thunder. "I have waited centuries for this moment, and I will not be denied my vengeance." Obinna staggered to his feet, positioning himself between Ikemba and the pedestal. "Your curse ends here, Ikemba," he said, his voice filled with a defiance he barely felt. "We've lifted the spirit's curse, and we will break yours too." Ikemba's laughter was cold and mocking. "You foolish child. You have no idea what you're dealing with." That box holds the power of your ancestors' betrayal. It is bound to your bloodline. Only by offering your life can you destroy it. Nkechi stepped forward, tears in her eyes. No, there has to be another way. We can't keep sacrificing ourselves. Ikemba's eyes narrowed. You misunderstand, girl. The box is a prison for the power your ancestor stole from me. If Obinna opens it, he will release the darkness within, consuming himself to end the curse. Obinna felt the weight of Ikemba's words pressing down on him. The box was both the key to ending the curse and a death sentence. But if he didn't act, Ikemba's dark magic would consume them all. Adaora's voice broke through his turmoil. Obinna, we can do this together. The spirits spoke of a heart willing to sacrifice. It doesn't have to end with your death. Ikemba sneered. Do you think love can overcome ancient magic? You are all pawns in a game far beyond your understanding. Obinna looked at his sister, at Adaora, at Jeopardy. They had all risked their lives to stand by him, to break the curse that had plagued his family for generations. He couldn't let their sacrifices be in vain. Taking a deep breath, Obinna approached the box. The markings on his arms glowed brighter, the heat of the magic searing his skin. As he placed his hands on the box, he felt a surge of energy that nearly knocked him off his feet. The darkness within the box writhed, clawing at him, trying to pull him in. Obinna, no. Nkechi screamed, rushing toward him. But Jeopardy held her back. This is his fight, Jeopardy said, his voice filled with sorrow. If he doesn't do this, the curse will never end. Obinna turned to Adaora, her eyes filled with tears. I believe in you, she whispered. But you must make the choice with a pure heart. Only then can you break the cycle. Summoning every ounce of strength, Obinna focused on the love he felt for his family and friends. He remembered his mother's sacrifice, the lives that had been lost, and the hope that remained. He let that love fill him, pushing back against the darkness that threatened to consume him. I will end this, Obinna declared, his voice steady. Not through vengeance, but through the power of love and sacrifice. He pulled open the lid of the box, and a blinding light erupted from within. The darkness that had filled the chamber shrieked in agony as it was pierced by the light. Ikemba screamed, his form flickering as if he were being torn apart. No, this cannot be. Ikemba cried out, his voice filled with rage and despair. You cannot destroy me. But the light grew brighter, and the shadows that clung to Ikemba began to dissolve. With one final, ear-splitting scream, the sorcerer was consumed by the light, his form disintegrating into nothingness. Obinna could feel the power surging through him, the curse that had bound his family for generations lifting at last. The markings on his arms faded, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly free. As the light from the box dimmed, the chamber was filled with a profound silence. Obinna collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. Adaora and Nkechi rushed to his side, tears streaming down their faces. You did it, Adaora whispered, her voice choked with emotion. You broke the curse. Obinna nodded weakly, a tired smile on his lips. It's over. But just as they began to embrace, the ground beneath them shook violently. The chamber walls began to crack, and the air was filled with a deafening roar. Before they could react, the floor beneath them gave way, and they were plunged into darkness once more. As they fell, Obinna heard a voice, ancient and malevolent, whispering in his mind. You may have defeated Ikemba, but the darkness that cursed your bloodline is far older. You have only scratched the surface of the evil that lies beneath. Obinna's heart sank. He had thought the nightmare was over, but it seemed they had only uncovered the beginning of a far greater darkness. Obinna's body hit the cold ground with a thud, knocking the breath out of him. For a moment, everything was black. Then, as his vision cleared, he realized they were back in the village of Obu, yet something was terribly wrong. The once familiar village square was shrouded in mist, and the sky overhead was an ominous, blood-red hue. The air smelled of burning earth, and a deep, unnatural silence hung over everything. Obinna. Nkechi's voice cut through the eerie quiet. She scrambled to her feet beside him, her eyes wide with fear. Adaora and Jeopardy appeared from the mist, their faces pale and confused. Where are we? Adora whispered, clutching the talisman that had once protected them. We were just in the cavern. How did we get here? This isn't our village, Jeopardy said, his voice heavy with dread. Or if it is, it's not the same Obu we know. We're somewhere between the living world and the spirit realm. Obinna staggered to his feet, his body aching from the fall. The markings that had once glowed on his arms were gone, replaced by a faint, dull ache. The curse was lifted, but something darker still lingered in the air. We broke Ikemba's curse, Obinna said, more to reassure himself than the others. We defeated him. But even as he spoke the words, he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that their battle wasn't truly over. The ground beneath them began to tremble again, and from the swirling mist, the shadowy figure of Ikemba reappeared. But this time, he was different. His form was less solid, more like a wraith, flickering in and out of existence. You thought you could destroy me? Ikemba's voice was a hollow echo, filled with rage and despair. You broke one curse, but you have only unleashed a deeper darkness. Obinna stepped forward, facing the spectral figure. We ended your curse, Ikemba. You have no power over us anymore, he said, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. Ikemba's ghostly form wavered, and his laughter was a cold, chilling sound that sent shivers down Obinna's spine. The curse I placed on your family was but a fragment of the true darkness that binds you, he hissed. Your ancestor Induka was not merely a thief, he awakened something far older than me, a force that has been waiting, festering in the shadows. What do you mean? Obinna demanded. We broke the curse. My family has paid enough. But Ikemba's form began to dissolve, his voice fading into a whisper. You will soon understand. The darkness was never mine to command. It was only borrowed. And now it has awakened. With those final words, Ikemba vanished, leaving them alone in the mist-filled square. But before Obinna could process what he had heard, the earth beneath them split open, and a dark, malevolent force erupted from the ground. It was as if the very shadows had come alive, twisting and writhing into monstrous forms. Nkechi screamed, clinging to Obinna as the shadows closed in. Adora held up the talisman, but its light was dimming, flickering like a candle about to be snuffed out. It's not working, she cried, panic rising in her voice. Jeopardy stepped forward, his eyes blazing with determination. This isn't just about breaking a curse, he said. We're dealing with something ancient, something that feeds on hatred and fear. If we're going to stop this, we have to confront it at its source. Obinna turned to Adora and Nkechi. Whatever this darkness is, it's tied to the sins of our ancestors, he said. We need to face it together. The ground shook violently, and the dark forms lunged toward them. Obinna felt a surge of energy from deep within, a final remnant of the curse's magic that he hadn't realized was still there. He took Adora's hand and then reached for Nkechi and Jeopardy. We have to combine our strength, he said. Together, we can end this. Closing his eyes, Obinna focused on the love and sacrifices of those who had stood by him. His mother's selfless act, Nkechi's unwavering faith, Adora's courage, and Jeopardy's willingness to defy his own father for the sake of what was right. He let their combined strength fill him, pushing back against the darkness. A brilliant light erupted from where their hands were joined, blinding the shadows that surrounded them. The dark forms shrieked and writhed, trying to escape the light, but it was too strong. The ground beneath them stopped trembling, and the mist began to dissipate. As the light spread, it revealed the true form of the darkness, an ancient, withered figure bound in chains made of shadows. Its eyes were empty voids, filled with centuries of hatred and pain. This was the true source of the curse, the dark force that had been using Ikemba as its pawn. You cannot destroy me, the entity hissed, its voice like the grinding of stones. I am the darkness that binds your bloodline. I am the vengeance that will never die. Obinna stepped forward, still holding onto the hands of his friends and sister. No, he said firmly. You have fed on the hatred and sins of my ancestors, but today we choose love over vengeance. The entity screamed as the light intensified, its shadowy chains dissolving into nothingness. With one final, agonizing wail, the darkness was consumed by the light, leaving only silence in its wake. The mist cleared completely, revealing the familiar landscape of Obu. The blood-red sky had faded, replaced by the warm light of dawn. The villagers began to emerge from their homes, confused but relieved to see that the nightmare was over. Obinna turned to his companions, his heart swelling with gratitude. "We did it," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "We finally ended the curse." Adora smiled, squeezing his hand. "It wasn't just you, Obinna. It was all of us." Nkechi embraced him tightly, her tears soaking into his shirt. "Mother's sacrifice, it wasn't in vain. We're finally free." Jeopardy placed a hand on Obinna's shoulder, his expression solemn but relieved. "You have broken the cycle, Obinna. Your family can finally live without the shadows of the past." As the villagers gathered around, Obinna realized that his family's name, once tarnished by the curse, was now redeemed. They had not only saved themselves, but had freed the village from a darkness that had lingered for generations. In the days that followed, Obinna, Nkechi, Adora, and Jeopardy worked together to rebuild their lives. The villagers, who had once shunned them, now looked upon them as heroes. The shrine that had once been a place of darkness was cleansed and became a place of worship and gratitude. Obinna stood at his mother's grave, a single tear rolling down his cheek. "I wish you could see this, Mother," he whispered. "Your sacrifice was not in vain." Adora joined him, taking his hand. "The darkness is gone, Obinna," she said softly. "Now, it's time for you to live your life." Obinna nodded, a new sense of peace filling his heart. The curse was broken, and with it, the cycle of vengeance that had bound his family for so long. At last, they were free to embrace the future without fear.